I came to Tucson that August morning to buy pack mules. I had $200 in my saddlebag. Everything left from selling my dead brother's surveying equipment. The coins were heavy in my palm when I counted them outside the auction yard. The smell hit me first. Animal sweat and tobacco spit and dust thick as flour. Then the sound. The auctioneer's voice carrying over the crowd like a hymn nobody wanted to hear. I tied my horse and walked to the rail because a man with business doesn't dawdle. The platform showed splinters and nail heads risen with weather. A woman stood there, Apache, by the bead in her black braid, rope burns on her wrists, torn cotton dress. She kept her spine straight while the crowd pressed forward with their hands reaching and their coins clinking. The auctioneer grinned. Who'll start at $50 for this heathen? She looked straight at me and spoke perfect English. You, surveyor, buy me. I'll show you water worth $50,000. The whole yard went silent. My hand froze on the coins. Every man in that yard turned to look at me. Some of them knew what I did for a living. Most didn't care. But she'd named me in front of witnesses, and now I had a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. The auctioneer recovered quick. Well now, seems the merchandise knows how to talk. Don't change the price, boys. He raised his voice. 50 to start. Do I hear 50? A ranch hand near the front lifted 2 fingers. 50. The auctioneer's chant started rolling. Numbers climbing. 60, 75. The woman didn't move. Didn't drop her eyes. She watched me like a hawk watches a rabbit hole, waiting to see which way I'd run. Another hand went up. Rail worker, by the look of his clothes. 100. The crowd made a noise between a laugh and a growl. The auctioneer grinned wider. Now we're spending real money. 100 from the gentleman in the good boots. Do I hear? 150. A man I didn't recognize. Older, scar across his jaw. He looked at the woman, the way a man looks at livestock he means to break. My stomach turned over. I told myself to walk away. Told myself I'd come for mules and wire and nothing else. Told myself a woman offering $50,000 in a public yard was either lying or insane or setting a trap I couldn't see yet. She turned her head just enough to meet my eyes again, nodded once, a tiny movement, permission or instruction, or both. I raised my hand before my brain caught up. 200. The auctioneer's gavel fell so fast it cracked like a gunshot. Sold to the surveyor. Step up and pay the clerk. The crowd shifted, some disappointed, some relieved they didn't have to spend their own money on a morning's entertainment. The scarred man spat in the dust and walked off. The rail worker shrugged and turned back toward the freight office. I moved to the clerk's table, on legs that didn't feel like mine, counted out every coin I had. The clerk marked it in his book with a pencil that needed sharpening. He tore a slip of paper and pushed it toward me. The woman's name line sat blank because nobody had asked it. My throat closed on something hot and bitter. I folded the paper once and put it in my pocket without looking at it again. The clerk pointed toward the platform. She's yours. Take her and clear the space. She stepped down before I could reach her. No stumbling, no hesitation. She walked straight to where I stood and stopped just outside arm's length. The sheriff leaned against a post nearby, with his hat low and his attention spread wide the way lawmen do when they're deciding whether to care. She spoke quiet, only for me. Your brother died, surveying the spring I know about. Railroad man killed him. I have proof buried where he fell. You file the patent claim and I testify against the killer. We split the land 50-50. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. What? You heard me. Her voice stayed level. No begging, no fear, just a deal laid out like fence posts. I watched them push him off the ridge 2 years ago, stayed hidden in the rocks until they left, found his surveying stake and his notes, and buried them before the vultures came. The air went thin. I couldn't pull enough of it into my chest. You're lying. Am I? She tilted her head toward my horse, toward the saddlebag tied behind the cantle. You've got his surveyor's transit wrapped in oilcloth. Haven't looked at it in months because you can't stand what's on the brass. Cold spread through my gut. Nobody knew about the transit except me. I'd kept it wrapped since the day I claimed my brother's effects from the territorial office. Told myself I'd clean it later. Told myself I'd use it for work once I could afford to work again. She took one step closer, close enough I could see the raw skin where the rope had chewed her wrist, close enough I could smell dust and mesquite smoke in her hair. Check the eyepiece. You'll see what I mean. My hands moved without permission. I walked to my horse and untied the saddlebag and pulled out the oilcloth bundle. The transit's brass caught the sun when I unwrapped it. The tripod legs folded tight. The telescope sights clean except for one dark stain near the eyepiece that I'd been pretending was rust. It wasn't rust. She said the words I'd been choking on for 2 years. I watched them push him. We rode out of Tucson with the sun already climbing mean. 2 hours northwest to the land she claimed to know. She sat the horse I'd planned to trade for wire, with the ease of someone who'd been riding since childhood. No saddle, just a blanket and her legs gripping steady. I led with my gelding and kept half a length ahead so I could watch the road. My mind ran circles. The transit sat wrapped again in my saddlebag, but I could feel the weight of it different now. Evidence instead of shame. She spoke first. "You see those stones?" She pointed to a formation rising from the scrub. 3 rocks stacked like a cairn but natural. Water runs underground there, flows north. Dry on top, but the mesquite roots go deep. I looked where she pointed, saw nothing but dust and thorns. "How do you know?" "My father taught me, before he forgot he had a daughter." Her voice stayed flat. No self-pity, just fact. He was a surveyor too. Worked for the railroad, until he found something they didn't want found. My throat tightened. "What happened to him?" "Same thing that happened to your brother." "Why?" She shifted her weight, and the horse moved left toward a draw I wouldn't have seen. Different ridge. Same man. We rode in silence after that. The land opened up red and raw. Heat shimmered off the flats, and the only sound was hooves on stone and the creak of leather. I tried to remember the last time I'd been out here. 3 years, maybe, before my brother took the claim. Before he wrote me a letter, saying he'd found something worth filing for. Before the territorial office sent word he'd fallen during a survey and broken his neck. I'd believed them because I wanted to. Because investigating meant spending money I didn't have. Because admitting murder meant admitting I'd let him down. She glanced back at me. "You think you should have known?" It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. Men like Mercer count on brothers being too broke or too scared to ask hard questions. She said it gentle, almost kind. "He's killed 8 surveyors in 6 years. You're not the only one who looked away." 8? The word came out hoarse. "That I know of. Could be more." She pointed ahead. "We're close now." The ridge appeared like a scar across the horizon. Red rock rising steep on one side. A dried creek bed cutting through the bottom. I recognized the shape of it from my brother's letters. He described the cottonwoods that used to line the water before the drought took them. Described the way the land dropped sharp where erosion had eaten the edge. My chest went tight. She reined in at the base and slid down, walked forward without waiting for me. I followed, because my legs knew to follow even when my head wanted to stop. She knelt near a mesquite stump. "Here." I saw it then, a surveying stake driven into hardpan, weathered gray but still standing. My brother's initials carved into the wood. TAA, Thomas Andrew Ashford, the letters he'd used since we were boys, playing at marking territory. My knees hit the ground before I felt them bend. The stake sat exactly 20 feet from the ridge edge, right where a surveyor would stand to sight his bearing before moving to the next point, right where someone could come up behind and push. 3 men. Her voice came quiet behind me. Middle of the day, June heat. I was gathering roots in the rocks up there. She pointed to an outcrop 30 yards east. Your brother had his back to them, setting up his tripod. They called his name. He turned. The tall one did the talking. "Who?" My voice didn't sound like mine. "Clayton Mercer, railroad land agent. Wears a gray coat even in summer. Keeps his pistol on his left hip because he's right-handed and likes the cross draw." She crouched beside me. "They argued about the map your brother had drawn. Mercer said it was wrong. Your brother said it was right, and he'd already sent a copy to the territorial office." Mercer nodded to the other 2 men. They grabbed your brother's arms, walked him to the edge, and pushed. The world tilted. I put my palm flat on the dirt to keep from falling over. The smell of creosote filled my nose. The sun burned the back of my neck. I heard my own breathing too loud in my ears. I stayed in the rocks until they left. She reached down and scraped away dirt from the base of the stake. Found this after they were gone. A tobacco tin, rusted at the edges. She pried it open and pulled out folded papers. My brother's handwriting covered the top page, his survey notes, measurements and bearings, and at the bottom, a list of names with dates beside them. James Colton, January 76, William Moore, March 75, Robert Chen, August 75, 6 names total. The last one was his own, Thomas A. Ashford, June 76, and beside each name 1 notation, CM. She looked at me steady. "Clayton Mercer killed my father too, 6 months before yours. I've been waiting for someone with legal standing to help me prove it." And we rode into town as the sun hit its peak. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat and dust. The tobacco tin sat in my saddlebag next to the transit, evidence of 8 murders wrapped in oilcloth and rust. The Territorial Land Office sat on the east side of the square, 2-story brick with a sign that needed repainting. We tied the horses at the rail, and I helped her down even though she didn't need help. People watched. A surveyor and an Apache woman made a picture that drew eyes whether you wanted them or not. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and ink. A ceiling fan turned slow overhead, but didn't move much besides the dust. The land clerk sat behind a counter stacked with ledgers. He looked up when the door shut, looked at me, looked at her, his face went careful. "Help you?" I pulled the tobacco tin from my coat, set it on the counter. I need to file a challenge to a railroad patent. Section 12, Township 4 North, Range 8 West. The clerk's eyebrow went up. That's Clayton Mercer's claim, filed and approved 3 months back. It's fraud. I opened the tin. Spread my brother's notes across the counter. Thomas Ashford surveyed that land in June. Found a spring at coordinates that don't match Mercer's filing. Mercer had him killed to hide it. What the clerk leaned back in his chair. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. I tapped the list of names. 8 surveyors dead. All worked claims Mercer later filed on. All died in accidents. Nobody witnessed. The clerk picked up the papers, read slow. His face stayed neutral, but his hand shook just enough to rattle the page. He set them down careful. You got witness testimony to back this? I do. I gestured toward Nashota. She saw my brother's murder. Saw Clayton Mercer give the order. The clerk's eyes flicked to her and then away. She Apache? She is. Then her testimony's inadmissible. He said it flat. No apology. Just territorial law delivered like bad weather. Section 47 of the Arizona Code. Indian testimony against white defendants requires corroboration from a white witness. You got one of those? My stomach dropped. She watched him die. I believe you. But the law says she can't testify, not alone. The clerk pushed the papers back toward me. You need a white witness or documented proof of fraud. Survey notes from your brother help, but they're not enough. Mercer can claim they're forged. I felt the trap close. The evidence sat right there on the counter, but the law wouldn't let it speak. I looked at Nashota. Her face stayed still, but her jaw tightened. She'd known before we rode in that her word wouldn't count. A door opened behind the clerk. A woman stepped through. Older, maybe 50. Hair pulled back in a steel gray bun. She wore a black dress and a silver brooch and carried herself like someone used to being heard. Trouble, Marcus? Her voice carried authority the clerk didn't have. No, ma'am, Judge Blackwell. Just explaining territorial code. Judge Blackwell moved to the counter, looked at the papers spread there, picked up the list of names. Her face changed. Something tightened around her mouth. James Colton. Hey, you knew him? I asked. He was my husband. She set the paper down with a hand gone steady through effort. Died in January. Fall from a survey ridge. At least that's what Clayton Mercer reported. Her eyes met mine. You're Thomas Ashford's brother. I am. And this woman witnessed the murder. She did. Judge Blackwell looked at Nashota for a long moment. Not the way the clerk had looked. Not through her. At her. What's your name? Nashota. And you saw Clayton Mercer kill this man's brother. I did. Watched from the rocks while 3 men pushed him off the ridge. Mercer gave the order. Same way he gave the order to kill my father 6 months before. The judge's hand curled into a fist against the counter. Marcus, close the office. Take your dinner early. The clerk stood quick, grabbed his hat. Yes, ma'am. He was out the door before she said another word. Judge Blackwell gestured toward a door behind the counter. My chambers, both of you. Keo. We followed her into a smaller room. A desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked onto an alley. She shut the door, and the sound of the street faded to something distant. She poured water from a pitcher into 3 tin cups, handed them to us. The water tasted of metal and dust, but it was wet. The clerk's right about the law. She sat on the edge of her desk. Apache testimony against a white defendant requires white corroboration. But there's a provision. I waited. Mrs. Ashford would have legal standing to testify. The words took a moment to land. I'm not married. I know. Judge Blackwell looked at Nashota. But if you were married to her, and if she had a documented property stake in the land claim, then she wouldn't be testifying as an Indian against a white man. She'd be testifying as a property owner with direct interest in the case. Nashota's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. The judge kept talking. You've got 30 hours before Mercer's claim auto-processes at midnight tomorrow. If you want to challenge it, you need to file a valid counterclaim with witness testimony. The court will accept. She pulled a document from her desk drawer. And you'll need this. She unrolled a map, old, the paper brown at the edges. Spanish text ran along the margins. A red line marked a boundary that included the section we'd been talking about. Mexican land grant, 1848, 640 acres that were never ceded to U.S. territorial jurisdiction. She tapped the map. The railroad has no legal claim here. Never did. But they filed anyway because nobody challenged the jurisdiction question. My pulse kicked. Where did you get this? Miguel Santos, blacksmith. His grandfather held the original grant. He'll testify if you can prove the spring location matches the Spanish deed's description. She looked between us. It describes agua sagrada, sacred water, beneath 3 stone formation. Nashota's breath caught. I know where that is. Miguel Santos kept his forge on the south edge of town, where the smoke wouldn't bother the church ladies. We found him there an hour later with his sleeves rolled up and a hammer in his scarred hands. The heat hit us before we crossed the threshold. The smell of coal smoke and hot metal. The sound of steel on steel ringing steady like a heartbeat. He looked up when our shadows fell across his workspace. Set the hammer down careful. Judge sent you. She did. I held out the Spanish land grant. She says you can read this. He wiped his hands on his apron and took the map. Unrolled it slow. His lips moved while he read. When he finished, he rolled it back up and handed it to me. My grandfather lost this land in 1852, not to war, to paper. Men with lawyers and English documents he couldn't read. They took 640 acres and left him nothing. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't give back land. He turned to the forge and pumped the bellows. The coals flared orange. But proving the railroad's claim as fraud might stop them from doing it to someone else. He looked at Nashada. The judge says you know where the spring is. I do. 3-stone formation. Water underneath. Miguel nodded. The deed calls it agua sagrada, sacred water. My grandfather's map shows it here. He pointed to a spot on the Spanish text. If you can prove that's where the spring sits, then the railroad survey is a lie, and their patent claim is void. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not hope exactly, just the shape of a path forward. What do you need from us? Proof. He pulled a brass disc from a shelf, 4 inches across, blank. I can forge a boundary marker, put both your symbols on it, surveyor's compass and... He looked at Nashota. What do your people use for water? A spiral? Circles going down into earth. Good. He set the disc on his anvil. I'll stamp both. You sync this marker at the spring location tomorrow. It'll show the territorial office that Western surveying and Apache knowledge both point to the same truth. Harder to call that a lie. He picked up a smaller hammer and a set of punches. Started tapping the design into the brass. The sound filled the shop. Precise, rhythmic. I watched his hands work and thought about how many times they'd done this. How many tools he'd made. How many horseshoes and gate hinges and things people needed to live. Nashota moved closer to the forge, held her hands near the heat. Why help us? Miguel didn't stop working. Because Mercer filed a false claim on my cousin's land 3 years ago. Same trick. Forged survey. My cousin couldn't read English. Lost everything. He paused, looked up. And because the judge asked, she's the only person in this territory who gave a damn when my grandfather died with nothing. The brass took shape under his hammer. The compass rose appeared first, then the spiral interweaving with it. When he finished, he held it up to the light. Metal remembers. You put this in the ground tomorrow, and it'll sit there 100 years. Proof that you were right. And the shop door opened. Sunlight cut across the floor. A man's shadow fell long and dark. Clayton Mercer stepped inside. I knew him before he spoke. The gray coat, the pistol on his left hip, the way he carried himself like a man who owned the air he breathed. 2 men came in behind him, railroad workers by their clothes. Both had gun belts. Mercer's eyes went to the brass marker in Miguel's hand, then to the map on the anvil, then to me. Tom Ashford, heard you were asking questions about my land claim. My hand wanted to move toward my gun. I kept it still. It's not your land. The territorial office says different. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Patent approved 3 months ago. 640 acres including all water rights. He smiled. You trying to file a challenge? I am. On what grounds? Fraud. You killed my brother to hide his survey. Killed 7 other men before him. I kept my voice level. I've got documentation, witness testimony, and a Mexican land grant that says the territory was never U.S. property to sell. Mercer's smile didn't change, but something went cold behind his eyes. He looked at Nashota. She your witness? She is? Apache woman. Can't testify against white defendants. Territorial law. He said it easy, like he was talking about weather. So you've got paper and a witness who doesn't count. That won't stop my claim from processing. Judge Blackwell says different. Judge Blackwell's a widow with a grudge. Mercer took a step closer. The floorboards creaked under his weight. I own the land clerk. I own the territorial governor's ear. And I've got connections in the federal marshal's office. He pulled out a pocket watch, checked the time, put it away. You've got 24 hours to withdraw your challenge. After that, I'll have federal marshals at dawn to clear you off my property. By force if needed. My throat went tight. You threatening me? I'm explaining how the world works. He tossed the patent paper onto the anvil. Next to the Spanish land grant. You file tomorrow, and I'll make sure that Apache woman gets charged as an escaped slave. Arizona still honors those warrants from Texas. Nashoda's hand curled into a fist, but her face stayed still. Mercer turned toward the door, stopped, looked back. 8 surveyors learned not to ask questions about my claims. You want to be number 9? He gestured to his men. They followed him out. The door swung shut. The sunlight cut off. The forge ticked in the silence. Miguel set the brass marker down careful. He's bluffing about the marshals. Maybe. My heart hammered against my ribs. But he's not bluffing about killing us. Nashoda moved to the window, watched the street. We file anyway. He'll kill you. He'll try. She turned. Her face had gone hard. But not if I have legal standing. Not if I'm Mrs. Ashford with a property stake in the claim. She looked at me steady. The judge said marriage would work, so we get married. The words hung in the air like smoke. Miguel cleared his throat. That's a hell of a reason to wed. It's the only reason that matters. Nashoda crossed the shop, stood close enough I could see the rope burns on her wrists hadn't healed yet. We have 30 hours. We spend 2 of them getting married so I can testify. We spend the rest proving Mercer's a murderer. My mind raced. Marriage meant papers, meant witnesses, meant standing in front of a preacher or a judge and speaking vows that would tie us together in the eyes of the law. Also, she could speak in a courtroom. You sure? Are you? She didn't blink. I thought about my brother's blood on the transit brass. Thought about 8 names on a list. Thought about Miguel's grandfather dying with nothing. Thought about how Mercer had built an empire on dead men's silence. Yeah. The word came out rough. I'm sure. Miguel picked up the brass marker and wrapped it in cloth. Handed it to me. Then you better go find Judge Blackwell. Tell her you need a marriage license. And tell her to perform the ceremony tonight. He looked between us. Because at dawn tomorrow, you're going to war. Judge Blackwell's chambers smelled of lamp oil and old leather. The sun had dropped behind the buildings and the light through the window came thin and orange. She sat at her desk with a marriage license already filled out except for the signatures. $2. The same price as filing a fraudulent land claim. You're sure about this? She looked at both of us. We are. I said it for both of us even though I probably shouldn't have. Nashoda spoke anyway. It's strategy, not love. If the law says I need his last name to speak against a white murderer, then I'll take his last name. The judge nodded, stood, pulled a small Bible from her shelf. Miguel's on his way. He'll stand witness. We do this quick and legal. No ceremony, no spectacle, just words that matter in court. Miguel arrived 5 minutes later, still wearing his forge apron. He took off his hat and stood by the door like a man who understood the weight of watching. Judge Blackwell opened the Bible but didn't read from it. She looked at me. Thomas Ashford, do you consent to this marriage? I do. She looked at Nashoda. Nashoda, do you consent? I do. Then by the authority of the Arizona Territory, I pronounce you married. Sign here. She turned the license toward us. I signed first. My hand shook just enough to make the letters waver. Nashoda took the pen, paused, wrote her name slow and careful. Nashoda Ashford. The ink sat dark and wet on the line. Miguel signed as witness. Judge Blackwell signed as officiant. She pressed her seal into red wax at the bottom. The stamp came away clean. Official. I reached into my pocket without thinking. Pulled out a tin ring I'd bought 2 months back when I thought I might court the school teacher. Never worked up the nerve to ask her. The ring had sat in my pocket since. I held it out to Nashoda. You should wear this. People will look. She took it, slid it onto her finger. Too loose. She curled her hand to keep it from falling off. I'll get used to it. Judge Blackwell folded the license and put it in a lockbox. You're legal now. That means tomorrow, when you testify, the court has to hear you. It also means you're both targets. She looked at me. Mercer will try to break this. He'll claim coercion. He'll claim fraud. You need to be ready to prove it was voluntary. It was. Nashoda's voice stayed steady. I chose this. For the same reason a man chooses a weapon when he's going into a fight. The judge's mouth curved just slightly. Not quite a smile. Mrs. Ashford, when this is over, if you want to dissolve this marriage, the law allows it. You understand that? I do. Good. Judge Blackwell stood. Then get out of my office and don't die before tomorrow's filing. We walked back to Miguel's forge in the dark. The street had gone quiet. Most people inside for supper. A few lamps burned in windows. The smell of cooking meat and wood smoke drifted on the air. Miguel's shop still glowed with forge light. He'd kept the fire going. He led us inside and shut the door. Pulled a piece of paper from his desk and unrolled it. A sketch. The spring location marked with an X. Survey coordinates written in the margins. Spanish text from the land grant copied at the bottom. Here's how tomorrow works. He tapped the map. You set up your surveyor's transit at the land office steps. Public demonstration. Tom measures the bearing to Mercer's claimed spring location. then measures the bearing to the actual spring location per his brother's notes. Show everyone how far off Mercer's survey is. I nodded. 400 yards. I already checked the math. Good. While you're doing that, Nashota walks the actual bearing with her dowsing rod, finds the 3-stone formation, proves the water sits exactly where the Spanish deed says sacred water should be. He looked at her. Can you do that in front of a crowd? I can. Miguel picked up the brass marker from his workbench. The design had been finished and polished. The surveyor's compass interlocked with the Apache water spiral, both symbols meeting in the center. He held it up to the forge light. This goes in the ground, at the spring. Physical proof that Western knowledge and Apache knowledge both point to the same truth. He handed it to me. The brass was warm, heavy. The engraving caught the light and threw tiny shadows. This seal goes in the ground tomorrow. Miguel's voice went quiet. If you survive, it stays there 100 years, long after Mercer's dead, long after all of us are dead. It'll sit there and tell anyone who digs it up that 3 people stood against a murderer and won. Nashota touched the spiral with one finger, traced the line down into the center. And if we don't survive, then someone finds it eventually, and they know we tried. Miguel wrapped the marker in cloth, tied it with cord, handed it back to me. Get some sleep. Dawn comes early, and tomorrow you're going to need steady hands. We left the forge and walked to the boarding house where I'd taken a room. The landlady saw Nashota, and her eyebrows went up, but she didn't say anything, just handed me a second key. Upstairs in the room, we stood on opposite sides of the small space, the bed between us, one chair, one window that looked onto the alley. Nashota turned the tin ring on her finger. Tomorrow, when we prove Mercer's a murderer, what happens to us after? I sat on the edge of the bed. I don't know, but you get to choose. Judge said so? She nodded, moved to the chair, sat with her back straight. Then I'll sleep here tonight, and tomorrow we'll see if we live long enough for choosing to matter. I gave her the blanket from the bed. She wrapped it around her shoulders. I lay down on top of the quilt, with my boots still on and my hand near my gun. Neither of us slept much. But we made it to dawn. Dawn came gray and cool. I woke to the sound of a rooster somewhere down the alley and the smell of coffee from the boarding house kitchen. Nashota sat in the same chair, still wrapped in the blanket, her eyes open. You sleep? Some. She stood and folded the blanket, set it on the bed neat. We should check the equipment. I unwrapped my brother's transit from the oilcloth. The brass caught the thin morning light. I'd wiped the blood off last night with water and a rag. The stain was gone, but I could still see where it had been. The eyepiece showed a small dent. The tripod legs moved smooth when I tested them. Nashota pulled a fresh willow branch from her saddlebag, green wood, flexible. She held it in both hands and walked the length of the room. I need to feel the pull before we get there. Need my hands to remember. Does it really work? She looked at me. You really think I'd bet my life on something that doesn't? Fair point. She closed her eyes. Moved the rod slow through the air. Water calls to water. Underground streams have a current. The willow feels it. You just have to listen with your hands instead of your ears. I watched the rod bend slightly downward. Could have been her wrist tilting. Could have been something else. I couldn't tell the difference and didn't need to. She believed it. That was enough. A knock on the door. 3 quick raps. I put my hand on my gun and opened it careful. A woman stood in the hallway. Apache. Same height as Nashota, same black braid, same cheekbones, but a scar ran from her left eye to her jaw. Old, healed white. Nashota went still. Kaya. The woman stepped inside without invitation. Shut the door behind her. She looked at me. At the transit on the bed, at the willow rod in Nashota's hands, then back to her sister. So it's true. You married a white surveyor. I did. Kaya's mouth tightened. Our uncle's in town. The air in the room changed, got colder. Nashota's hand curled around the willow rod hard enough to make it creak. Why? Mercer sent for him, paid him to come testify. Kaya moved to the window, looked down at the street. He's telling people you're a liar and a thief, says you stole from our family and ran, says you can't be trusted. My stomach dropped. He's Mercer's witness. He is, Kaya turned. He'll stand in that land office today and tell everyone Nashota's a criminal. Tell them she'd say anything to a white man if he paid her. Nashota's face had gone hard. How much did Mercer pay him? $50? Same price he got for selling you to the trader in the first place. The number sat in the air like poison. $50, less than what I'd paid at auction. A man had sold his own niece for the price of a good horse. I looked at Kaya. Why are you telling us this? Because he lied about me too. She touched the scar on her face. Told the tribe I died at birth. Twins are taboo in some families. Bad luck. He kept Nashota because she was born first, said I was stillborn and buried me in the rocks. But my mother's sister found me, raised me away from the camp. Nashota's breath caught. I thought you were dead. I know. Kaya reached into her shirt and pulled out a second tobacco tin, older than the first. The rust had eaten through one corner. I've been following our uncle for 2 years, waiting for him to make a mistake. Found this buried near his camp last month. She opened the tin. Inside were more papers, survey notes, but different handwriting. I recognized it from the Spanish land grant. Older style, formal. What is this? Your father's first set of notes. Kaya looked at Nashota. The ones he buried before Mercer killed him. They name every railroad official who paid Mercer for fraudulent patents, including the territorial governor's brother-in-law. My hands shook when I took the papers. Read the list. 6 names. All high up in the territorial government or the railroad company, all with dollar amounts next to them, all dated across 5 years. This is evidence of conspiracy, federal crime. I looked up. Where did you find this? Our uncle was keeping it. Insurance policy, in case Mercer ever turned on him. Kaya's smile was sharp. He didn't know I was alive to steal it. Nashota moved to her sister. They stood face to face, mirror images except for the scar. You came to help. I came to watch him pay. Kaya's voice stayed flat. When he stands up to lie about you, I'll stand up too. Twin sister he said was dead. Every word out of his mouth becomes suspect. And when the judge asks where I've been, I'll say raised by family who didn't sell children for railroad. Money. I felt something shift. Not hope exactly. More like the weight of a fight tipping toward our side. Judge Blackwell needs to see this, the second tin, the government names. Then we go now. Nashota picked up the transit. Kaya took the brass marker wrapped in cloth. I grabbed both tobacco tins. We moved down the stairs quiet. The boarding house was waking up. Voices in the kitchen. The smell of frying eggs and coffee. We slipped out the back door before the landlady could ask questions. The street was empty, too early for most business. The land office wouldn't open for another 2 hours. But Judge Blackwell's chambers had a separate entrance. We headed that way, with the sun just starting to touch the rooftops. Kaya walked beside her sister. Their steps matched. Same rhythm, same stride. Anyone who saw them would know they were twins. Would know the uncle's testimony was a lie before he opened his mouth. We reached the judge's door. I knocked twice, waited, knocked again. The door opened. Judge Blackwell stood there in the same black dress, her hair already pinned. She looked at the 3 of us, at the tobacco tins in my hands, at the twin sisters standing side by side. He brought a second witness, didn't he? He did, but so did we. Judge Blackwell spread the papers from the second tobacco tin across her desk. Read each one slow. Her finger traced the names, the dollar amounts, the dates that stretch back 5 years. When she finished, she looked up at me with eyes gone cold. This implicates federal officials. The territorial governor's office. 3 railroad executives. She tapped one name. And a federal judge in Santa Fe. She set the papers down careful. If you bring this into open court, people will die. Maybe you, maybe me, certainly anyone who testifies. My throat went dry. We have to. I know. She stood, walked to the window. The street outside was starting to wake up. A wagon rolling past. A woman sweeping her porch. Normal morning sounds that wouldn't stay normal much longer. Mercer will try to have you arrested before you can testify. He'll claim you're trespassing. He'll bring men with guns. Kaya spoke from the doorway. Let him try. I'll testify that our uncle sold Nashota for railroad money. That makes him Mercer's accomplice. Makes his testimony worthless. It helps. Judge Blackwell turned back to us. But you still need to prove the spring location matches the Spanish deed. That's what voids the railroad's claim. Everything else is murder charges that'll take months to prosecute. I picked up the transit. We'll prove it. Public demonstration. Tom measures the bearing to where Mercer says the spring is. Then we measure to where it actually is. 400 yards difference. That's not surveying error. That's fraud. Nashota held up the willow rod. And I'll find the water exactly where the Spanish deed describes it. 3-stone formation. Sacred water underneath. The judge looked at both of us for a long moment. You understand what you're asking me to do. I have to let this play out in open court, in front of witnesses. I can't protect you if Mercer's men draw weapons. The bailiff is one man. You'll be surrounded. I know. And you're still going through with it. I am. I felt the weight of the decision settle into my bones. My brother died, trying to tell the truth about this land. 7 other men died before him. If I walk away now, their deaths don't mean anything. Judge Blackwell nodded, gathered the papers, and put them back in the tin. Then we do this right. Court opens at 9. You set up your equipment on the office steps before that. Make it public, make it visible. I'll have the clerk post notice that there's a disputed patent claim being heard today. That'll bring a crowd. Mercer will bring his men. Let him. The more witnesses, the better. She handed me both tobacco tins. Keep these close. When the time comes, you present them together. Show everyone that two different surveyors documented the same fraud over 6 years. That's your proof of pattern. We left the judge's chambers as the sun cleared the buildings. The heat was already building, going to be a scorcher. My shirt stuck to my back before we'd walked 2 blocks. Nashota walked beside me without talking. Her face had that closed look she got when she was thinking hard about something. Finally, she stopped, right there in the middle of the street. I need to say something before we do this. I waited. You bought me, at an auction, like cattle. Her voice stayed level, but her eyes were hard. Even if you did it for good reasons, you participated in something evil. My chest went tight. I know. Do you? She stepped closer. Because you've been carrying that transit wrapped up like it's the only thing that matters. Your brother's blood. Your brother's death. But you paid money to own a person. That's a different kind of blood. The words hit like fists. I wanted to defend myself. Wanted to explain that I'd been trying to help, that I'd torn up the paper, that I'd given her choices, but all of that was just noise around the central truth. I'd bought her. You're right. The words came out rough. I tell myself it was to save you, but part of me saw an opportunity, saw a way to get my land claim, saw a tool I could use. I met her eyes. I'm sorry. She was quiet for a moment. The street sounds filled the space between us. A dog barking, wheels creaking, someone hammering nails into wood somewhere close. I used you too, she said it flat. Used you for legal standing. Used you to get a last name that would let me testify. We both traded dignity for survival. She turned the tin ring on her finger. But now we take that survival and make it mean something. We stop Mercer. We speak for the dead. We put evidence in the ground that'll last 100 years. I nodded, couldn't quite speak yet. After today, if we live, what happens to us? She asked it quiet, the same question from last night. But this time, it felt different. Heavier. I don't know, but you get to choose. That was always true, even when I forgot it. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once. All right, let's go to war. We walked the last 3 blocks to the land office. Miguel was already there. He'd brought a wooden crate for the transit, set it up on the steps where everyone could see. The brass gleamed in the morning sun. People were gathering. Word had spread the way word does in small towns. Disputed claim, public hearing, Apache woman testifying, the kind of spectacle nobody wanted to miss. I set up the transit on its tripod, leveled it careful, checked the sights. The mechanism moved smooth, no rust, no hesitation, just clean brass and good engineering. Nashota held the willow rod loose in both hands, practicing the motion, finding the feel of it. Kaya stood beside her sister, the mirror image that would destroy their uncle's lies. Miguel approached with the brass boundary marker still wrapped in cloth. Ready? As will ever be. He unwrapped it. The morning light caught the engraving. Surveyor's compass interlocked with Apache water spiral. The 2 symbols meeting in the center like a handshake between worlds. This goes in the ground at the spring. Miguel's voice carried across the steps. People turned to listen. Physical proof that 2 ways of knowing both point to the same truth. I took the marker, heavy in my palm, warm from Miguel's forge. I set it on the crate next to the transit. The land office door opened. The clerk stepped out, saw the equipment, saw the crowd. His face went careful. What's all this? Public hearing on a disputed patent claim. Judge Blackwell's voice came from behind him. She moved through the doorway in her black dress and silver brooch, carrying a leather folder thick with papers. Section 12, Township 4 North, Range 8 West. Ashford versus Mercer. We're hearing testimony at 9 o'clock sharp. The clerk's Adam's apple bobbed. Yes, ma'am. I pulled both tobacco tins from my coat, set them side by side on the crate, opened them so the papers showed. My brother's handwriting in one, James Colton's in the other. 6 years of fraud documented by 2 dead men. These surveyors logged the same crime before Mercer silenced them. I said it loud enough for the crowd to hear. Today, we speak for all 8 dead men. A murmur went through the watchers. Some moved closer, some stayed back, all of them staring at the tins, at the papers inside, at the evidence laid out in morning light. Then the crowd parted. A man walked through, gray coat despite the heat, pistol on his left hip, 2 railroad men behind him with their hands near their guns. Clayton Mercer smiled when he saw me. Well now, this is quite a show you're putting on, Tom. Mercer stepped up onto the land office steps like he owned them. His boots made hollow sounds on the wood. The 2 railroad men stayed at the bottom, hands loose, but ready. The crowd pressed closer. wanting to see, wanting to hear. You're filing a challenge to my patent. Mercer said it like a statement, not a question. I am. I kept my hand away from my gun. Your survey's fraudulent. My brother documented the real spring location before you killed him. Strong accusation. Mercer looked at the tobacco tins, at the papers visible inside. Based on what? Notes from a dead man and an Apache woman's word? Based on 2 dead surveyors who documented your fraud independently. I tapped the first tin. Thomas Ashford, June 1876. Tapped the second. James Colton, January 1876. Both logged the same crime. Both ended up dead 3 days after completing their surveys. The crowd made a sound, low, angry, people shifting. Mercer's smile thinned. You can't prove I had anything to do with their deaths. She can. I gestured to Nashota. She watched you give the order. Apache testimony's inadmissible. You know that. Mercer looked at Judge Blackwell. Tell him, Your Honor. The judge stepped forward, opened her leather folder. Mrs. Ashford's testimony is admissible. She has legal standing as a property owner with direct interest in this patent dispute. She held up the marriage certificate. Fresh ink. Yesterday's date. Married yesterday evening in my chambers. Properly filed and witnessed. Mercer's face went dark. That's coercion. It's strategy. Nashota spoke for the first time. Her voice carried clear across the steps. I chose marriage so the law would let me speak against you. Now the law has to listen. An older Apache man pushed through the crowd, gray in his hair, scar across his knuckles. He pointed at Nashota. That woman's a liar and a thief, stole from our family. Can't be trusted. Kaya stepped forward, stood beside her sister. The crowd went silent. The uncle's face drained of color. You told the tribe I died at birth. Kaya's voice cut like a blade. Told them twins were bad luck, buried me in the rocks and kept my sister, but I didn't die. And now I'm here to tell everyone what you really are. She turned to the crowd. This man sold his own niece to a trader for $50, railroad money, paid by Clayton Mercer to provide false testimony. The uncle's mouth worked, but no sound came out. Judge Blackwell made a note in her ledger. The witness is impeached. His testimony is stricken. She looked at Mercer. Anyone else you'd like to bring forward? Mercer's hand drifted toward his pistol. The bailiff stepped closer, hand on his own gun, the moment stretched tight as wire. Then Mercer let his hand drop. This isn't over. You're right. I picked up the transit. We're going to prove your survey's a fraud, right now, in front of everyone. I looked at the judge. With the court's permission? She nodded. Proceed. I set the transit level. Sighted through the telescope. The brass eyepiece was warm against my face. I could see where the blood had been, where I'd wiped it away last night. The metal held the memory even when the stain was gone. According to Mercer's filed survey, the spring sits at bearing 045 degrees, range 320 yards northeast. I pivoted the transit. According to my brother's survey, completed 3 days before his death, the spring sits at bearing 320 degrees, range 720 yards north-northwest. I step back, let the crowd see the difference. 400 yards, not surveying error, not close enough to claim mistake. The Spanish land grant describes Agua Sagrada, sacred water, located beneath a 3-stone formation. I looked at Nashota. Show them. She walked down the steps, holding the willow rod in both hands. The crowd parted. She moved with the rod extended, following the bearing I'd called, north-northwest, past the buildings, past the corrals, out toward the scrubland where the town ended. People followed. I grabbed the brass marker and went after her. The whole crowd moved like a current. Judge Blackwell, Miguel, Kea, the bailiff, Mercer and his men, the clerk, townsfolk who'd come to watch. All of us walking into the heat. Nashota stopped at a dry wash. 3 rocks rose from the ground. Natural formation. Stacked like a cairn, but nobody had stacked them. The willow rod in her hands bent down hard. She walked a circle. The rod stayed bent, pointing at the earth between the stones. Here. She looked back at me. This is where the water runs. I walked forward with the marker. Knelt in the dust. The brass was hot enough to burn. I used my knife to dig. 6 inches down. 8. The soil changed color, got darker, damp. I set the marker in the hole. The surveyor's compass and Apache water spiral faced up, catching sunlight. Then I packed the earth around it, tamped it firm. Miguel stepped forward, pulled a small hammer from his belt, tapped the marker flush with the ground. This seal goes in the earth today. It'll sit here 100 years. Proof that Western surveying and Apache water knowledge both pointed to the same truth. The crowd pressed close, looking at the marker, at the 3 stones, at the dark soil that showed water underneath. I stood, pulled both tobacco tins from my coat, held them up. These surveyors documented Clayton Mercer's fraud across 6 years, 8 men dead, all killed for trying to tell the truth about railroad land theft. I opened the second tin, pulled out the papers with government names, including federal officials who took bribes to approve false patents. Mercer's hand went for his gun. The bailiff's pistol cleared leather first. "Don't." Mercer froze. His railroad men stepped back, hands up, not willing to die for another man's crimes. Judge Blackwell moved through the crowd. Based on the evidence presented, including 2 independent survey documents, witness testimony from Mrs. Ashford, and the 1848 Mexican land grant, this court rules the disputed territory was never united states property to sell. The railroad's patent is void. She looked at Mercer. Further, you are remanded for trial on 8 counts of murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. The bailiff moved to take Mercer's gun. Mercer jerked back. You can't prove any of this. It's all speculation and... Thunder rolled overhead. Everyone looked up. Clouds had appeared, dark gray. Moving fast from the west, the first drops hit the dust around us. Big fat drops that left circles in the dirt, then more. Then the sky opened. Rain. 4 months of drought breaking. People turned their faces up, let the water hit them. Some laughed. Some cried. The rain came down harder, soaking shirts, turning dust to mud. I looked at Nashota. Water ran down her face, down her arms. She was smiling. First real smile I'd seen from her. The bailiff got Mercer's hands behind his back, tied them with cord, led him away through the rain. The crowd followed, talking loud, excited. The kind of energy that comes when something big shifts and everyone knows they witnessed it. Nashota knelt by the brass marker, put her hand on it. The rain made the engraving shine. The compass and spiral interlock looked like it had always been there, like the ground had been waiting for it. I knelt beside her. You did it. You spoke for your father. For my brother? For all 8. We did it. She turned the tin ring on her finger. It was loose, almost falling off. The paper says we're married. Do we stay that way? I looked at her. Really looked. Rain dripping from her braid, mud on her dress, hand on the marker we'd put in the ground together. I reckon that's your call, Mrs. Ashford. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, ask me again tomorrow when we're not covered in mud and my hands stop shaking. Fair enough. We walked back to town in the rain, the whole crowd streaming toward the land office. Toward drinks and celebration and the kind of talk that would last for years. But I kept looking back at the 3 stones, at the place where the marker sat buried. Proof that we'd been there, proof that the truth had cost blood, but silence cost more. The land office was packed. Water dripped from everyone's clothes, pooled on the floor. The smell of wet wool and bodies pressed close filled the air. The clerk stood behind his counter looking like a man who'd just watched his world tilt. Judge Blackwell set both tobacco tins on the counter. File these as evidence. Murder investigation, federal case. She pulled out the marriage certificate, the patent filing form Tom and Nashota had prepared, and file this. Joint ownership, Thomas Ashford and Nashota Ashford. 640 acres with water rights. Based on the 1848 Mexican land grant and documented survey by Thomas A. Ashford, June 1876. The clerk's hand shook when he took the papers. He dipped his pen, started writing, his ledger page filled with names and dates and legal descriptions. When he finished, he pressed the territorial seal into red wax. The stamp came away clean. Recorded. He pushed a copy across the counter. Joint patent. Effective immediately. Nashota took the paper, stared at her name, written in official ink. Nashota Ashford, property owner. Legal person with standing to testify. The thing she'd traded a marriage for. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. People spilled into the street, talking loud, excited. Miguel stood with a group of Mexican families, showing them the copy of his grandfather's land grant, pointing to the boundaries. His face showed something I hadn't seen before. Hope, maybe. Or justice that had been 40 years late. Kaya stood with her uncle. The bailiff had him in custody, too. Accessory to fraud. The uncle wouldn't look at his nieces, just stared at his feet while the rain dripped from his hair. A group of railroad workers gathered near the saloon, quiet, worried. With Mercer arrested and the patents void, their jobs were gone. Some of them had families, some had debts. They'd worked for a criminal without knowing, now they'd pay the price anyway. I felt Nashota watching me. You feel sorry for them. Some. I looked at the men. They didn't kill anyone. They just laid track where they were told. That's how evil works. Most people just do their jobs. She folded the patent paper, slid it inside her shirt. Doesn't make the evil less real. We walked to Miguel's forge. He'd kept the fire going. The shop was warm, dry. He poured coffee that tasted like it had been on the boil since yesterday. We drank it anyway. What happens now? Miguel asked. Federal marshals come from Santa Fe. Judge Blackwell had followed us. She stood in the doorway with water dripping from her dress. They'll investigate the bribery, the murders. Could take months, could take years. But Mercer's done. So are the officials he paid. And the land? I set my cup down. Yours, both of you, legally filed and recorded. She looked at Nishada. You're a property owner now. That means you vote. You pay taxes. You have legal standing in any territorial court. She paused. And you can dissolve the marriage anytime you want. The law allows it. Nishoda turned the tin ring on her finger, still too loose. How long do I have to decide? Long as you need. Judge Blackwell's voice softened. But know this. You earned that land, not because you married him, because you stood in front of a crowd and testified against a murderer. Because you found water where the law said you couldn't. That's yours, no matter what you decide about the marriage. The judge left. Miguel went back to his forge work. Hammer on steel, the rhythm steady and sure. I sat on a crate and felt the exhaustion hit. 2 days of no sleep. The weight of my brother's death finally spoken out loud. The transit cleaned of blood. The evidence buried in the ground where it would last. Nishoda moved to stand by the forge, watching Miguel work. You asked what happens to us. I still don't have an answer. That's all right. Is it? She looked at me. You bought me, married me, put your name on me like a brand. Even if we had good reasons, that's what happened. I didn't argue. Couldn't. But you also gave me the law as a weapon, stood beside me when Mercer drew his gun, trusted my knowing when your surveying said different. She pulled the patent paper from her shirt, unfolded it. We earned this together. Western knowledge and Apache knowledge. Both needed, both true. So what do you want? She was quiet for a long time. The forge hissed. Rain dripped from the roof. Somewhere down the street, a piano started playing. Celebration music. I want to keep the name, for now. She refolded the paper. Not because you own me, because we built something that matters. Your brother's death means something now. My father's death means something. 8 men got their truth spoken. She looked at the patent. And I'm a legal person with property rights. First Apache woman in this territory to own land in her own name. You could change your name back. Keep the land. Judge said so. I could. She met my eyes. But I'm not ready to. Ask me again in a year. Maybe I'll feel different. Maybe I won't. She turned the ring one more time. For now, we're partners. Business partners who became something I don't have a word for yet. I stood, held out my hand. Partners, then. She took it. Her grip was strong, calloused from work. Partners who might become friends. Given time? I'd like that. Miguel stopped hammering, looked at both of us. The marker's in the ground. Your names are in the ledger. The rain broke the drought. He smiled. Tired, but real. That's a good day's work. Maybe you should rest before you figure out the rest. We left the forge as evening came on. The rain had stopped. The street smelled clean, washed. People moved slower now, the excitement fading into exhaustion. Nishada walked beside me toward the boarding house. I'll keep the room tonight. You keep yours. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. All right. At the door, she paused. Thank you for standing with me, for not running when Mercer drew his gun. You did the same for me. I know. She touched the patent paper through her shirt. That's why it matters. She went inside. I stood in the street for a moment, breathing air that tasted like rain and dust and something new I couldn't name yet. The transit sat in my saddlebag, clean now, ready to be used for honest work. The brass marker sat in the ground 3 miles away, compass and spiral locked together. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if the marriage would last or dissolve. Didn't know if Nishada and I would become friends or just business partners who split the water rights down the middle. But I knew this. My brother's death had been spoken, justice had been served, and somewhere under 3 stones water flowed clean and free. That was enough. For now. I'll tell you what I learned from buying a woman at auction and marrying her the next day. Water doesn't lie. It flows where it flows regardless of what any survey map claims. But if you want to find it, you need more than one way of knowing. My brother's transit and Nishoda's willow rod both pointed to the same truth. Western science and Apache wisdom aren't enemies. They're 2 halves of what's real. The law can be a weapon when you've got nothing else. A $2 marriage license gave her a voice in a courtroom that wanted her silent. That's not romance. That's survival turned into justice. We stayed married 3 years, worked the land together, hired Miguel's cousins to help with the fencing, let Kaya bring her family to camp by the spring. The water kept flowing even after the drought ended. Turns out my brother had been right. That spring was worth everything. Nishoda taught Apache children to read in 3 languages, English, Spanish, their own. She was good at it, better than ranching. When a schoolteacher from Santa Fe came through and asked her to marry him, she said yes. Sent me a letter afterward, signed it, your former business partner. That felt about right. Last time I rode out to the Three Stones, the brass marker was still there, half buried now, covered in lichen. But the engraving showed clear when I brushed the dirt away. Compass rose and water spiral locked together, proof that we'd stood against a murderer and won. Miguel's still working his forge, teaching his grandson the trade. Judge Blackwell retired 2 years back. Sits on her porch and writes letters to lawyers in Washington about territorial law reform. The railroad never rebuilt their claim. Too many eyes watching now. My brother's transit sits on my shelf. Clean brass, no blood. I use it for honest work. Survey property lines for families trying to file legitimate claims. Make sure the measurements are true. Clayton Mercer hanged for murder in 1878. Federal court in Santa Fe. 8 counts. He went to the ropes still claiming he'd done nothing wrong. Some men die without ever seeing what they were. The spring still flows, clear and cold, tastes like stone and sky. Sometimes I see Apache families camp there, Kaya's grandchildren playing in the water, learning the old songs, learning the new ones too. That marker's gonna sit in that ground long after I'm dead. Long after everyone who remembers this story is gone. Someday someone will dig it up and wonder what it means. 2 symbols that shouldn't go together, but do. I hope they figure it out. Truth costs blood, but silence costs more.